Hi, I'm Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline lawyer. In this episode, we're going to answer this question. Can a buyer switch lenders from the lender who authored the buyer's pre-approval letter? This question comes to me often in the format of a contest between the listing broker and the buyer broker, because the listing broker believes that the buyer waived the buyer's financing contingency by switching lenders without seller's consent. Here are the background facts that lead up to this question most often. Buyer presented their offer with a letter from, let's just say, ABC Mortgage as the author of the pre-approval letter. Seller agreed to do business with this buyer, probably in part based on the strength of that letter and maybe even the listing agent's advocacy that ABC Mortgage is a good company to work with. If they say that the buyer is pre-qualified, then the buyer probably is. And so seller and listing broker are moving forward with the belief that buyer is going to make or has made loan application with ABC Mortgage. And then sometime during the processing of the transaction, more than 5 days after mutual acceptance, listing broker learns for the first time buyer did not make loan application with ABC Mortgage. Instead, buyer made loan application with XYZ Mortgage. And so the question comes to me as the hotline lawyer, was buyer allowed to switch lenders without seller's consent? And the answer to that exact question with that exact background of facts is yes. Buyer was allowed to switch lenders because buyer didn't, in fact, switch lenders. What buyer did was give a pre-approval letter from ABC Mortgage and then make loan application with XYZ. And while that may feel to the listing broker and the seller like the buyer switched lenders, buyer was never committed to ABC Mortgage based on ABC Mortgage authoring a pre-approval letter. The context of this question comes from the language in the financing contingency, Form 22A, where it becomes very clear, based on the black and white language in that contingency, that if the buyer, quote unquote, switches lenders more than 5 days after mutual acceptance without seller's consent, then buyer has waived the financing contingency. And in the context of that statement, there is an additional requirement that the buyer must make loan application within the first 5 days following mutual acceptance. There are no requirements as to who the lender must be with whom buyer makes loan application in those first 5 days. Seller and listing broker have a belief that buyer is going to make loan application with the lender who wrote the pre-approval letter, but there is absolutely no requirement in any of the boilerplate language in any of the statewide forms that buyer must use that lender. And so instead, what the forms require is that buyer make loan application with whomever buyer intends to take a loan within those first 5 days. And then if after 5 days buyer switches lenders, then buyer would have to have seller's consent in order to switch lenders without waiving the financing contingency. So the lesson, listing brokers, is if it is important to your seller that buyer utilize the services of the lender who authored the pre-approval letter, then you have to make that part of the purchase and sale agreement. That is not a requirement in the boilerplate language of any of the statewide forms. So if you, as the listing broker writing a counteroffer on behalf of seller, want to lock buyer in to utilizing the services of the lender who authored the pre-approval letter, you have to draft that language into seller's counteroffer. I know the question that's going to come. The question is going to be, what language do we use to do that? And I cannot draft counteroffer language for you. If you need assistance drafting that counteroffer language for your seller, you should work with your managing broker and get legal counsel if you need it. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please ask a question by visiting warealtor.org, following the links to the legal hotline. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.